Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I hope you and your families are safe during these challenging times. Secondly, thank you for joining us for episode 2 of the GRC Virtual Supper Club. The topic is, will companies start to embrace the Zoom work culture, and how will this impact their risk environments? As many of you may know, the Supper Club is a global peer group network and not a sales event, with emphasis on sharing, learning, and ultimately having fun, bringing fun to governance, risk, and compliance. The camera's open, so we've got Chris Phillips back in the room, Stelios back in the room, and also our special guest star, Alan Barr. I'll see if I can make him a panelist and activate his camera as well.
Lee, your suit is just so snappy.
Oh, thank you. It's an old one. It's an old one. But thank you very much. And I don't want to stretch out the time too much like we did last time. We've been having some issues with the cameras because we've got so many of us on screen. Maybe bringing people in might be a bit of a challenge. But I know Andrew McIntyre had a question, and it might be a good one to start for Alan maybe, which is, you know, we're talking about security in Zoom and the various other things, but what he's noticing is more and more children are joining calls and parents in the background. So there's a new risk of, you know, the home and the office merging, you know, and when me and Nita met a few days ago, her daughter was in the room as well, which is not a problem at all. But is that opening up any question, you know, any risks for companies or any, I think actually, Sean, we spoke about this as well in terms of conflicts of interest. So just wondering, Alan, from your side, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's opening up a huge risk, and I thought it was really interesting that Stelios talked a lot about, you know, people working in, you know, cafes, etc. And I think that's one that organisations are quite, you know, not mature, but have at least considered in the past. But I think, you know, the risk of, you know, talking of Zoom in particular, you know, we're seeing people using their personal Zoom accounts to escape the sort of standard time limit in order to do work calls. You know, people using the chat functionality and that, then saving that down, etc. But I think the real one about when people are in the office, or at least in a sort of slightly safer environment, you can at least guarantee that you've got over 50% of their attention. But I think if somebody's doing it while trying to manage 2 or 3 young toddlers, there's absolutely, you know, it's less than 20%, and it's just, you know, I think it's just trying to manage that and actually getting the message out to colleagues that at time it may actually be best to say, rather than making yourself available all the time, specify set hours where you can work in a safe environment. Because my final comment on it would be, it's the accidental thing, is that you're working in a document and a toddler just drops something in your PC, and before you know it, a draft or a confidential document is sent by, you know, predictive email fill to a whole series of external contacts, etc., completely accidentally. But once it's gone, it's gone. So yeah, a whole new raft of risks. But I certainly, my recent experiences, I don't think organisations have actually faced into how to manage that, because they've been so busy trying to make sure people can actually work from home.
Brilliant. That's a great answer. And in terms of, you know, anyone to follow up that, we have got more questions, but does anyone want to jump in there on that topic?
Well, Lee, it was always a big issue. People on trains actually having conversations have been overheard. One of the big, I always remember coming across this myself with someone with their computer on in the train, and they were having a conversation on the phone, and everyone in the carriage could hear exactly what they were saying. So this is just multiplying that issue, particularly when they go into cafes or they go into what are effectively insecure locations to have phone calls and use the computers.
Maybe things are different over in Europe right now, but I know in New York, you know, even if a cafe is open, not many are. It's strictly for takeaway, right? Nobody is really sitting inside right now and using those Wi-Fi networks. So, are these kind of risks to anticipate when things reopen, or is this something that might be a little bit different in Europe for you guys?
That's a very good point. I think, Stelios, did you have a point on that? I like it. If you can put your finger up, that's brilliant. It's like it's good. But yeah, Stelios, got a point.
Actually, I totally agree with Sean. For sure, this is a risk that maybe it's not so much evident now because nobody can sit in a hall of a cafe, but definitely it's going to start happening more and more as the cafes will start accepting customers. And yeah, I will admit it, because I don't think, well, it's good that we make my own self-criticism. Before COVID, I have attended a conference call. Fortunately, there was no confidential information shared, but I have attended the call from a coffee shop, and actually people could hear me when I was talking about several things. And definitely, it is something which happens, and we have to control it. And the way that we control it, at least in SaarGummi, is that we are giving guidelines as regards to how they should be, how each meeting should be treated, and especially we have policies that govern confidential meetings. So, for example, there is a guideline that says that if you enter into a meeting that has been classified as confidential, you must always use a headset, so that what other people are saying to you, at least, is not being heard by people who shouldn't hear it. And this is maybe one way to basically control this kind of risk.
No, absolutely. No. And just another question is quickly coming actually from Alison Wheatley, and this probably more towards Terry actually on this point initially, and then we can open it out. But after Fukushima in Japan, certification to the ISO standards, especially 27001, became much more important to all companies to provide assurance to customers and suppliers. Should the current global situation not turn company attention to these global assurances for future robustness and agility?
So it's an interesting question. I think the shift that's taking place in the practitioner community and within these companies is away from BCM and to the topic of resilience. People are starting to really question, well, what does it mean to be resilient? And if you look at the material from the Bank of England, for example, on operational resilience and what came out of the SCA, you can take a lot of what they have produced and cross-reference it to ISO 22301, to some of the Federal Reserve publications going back 17 years after 9/11 and banking resilience. And I think that drove what happened at 9/11 here in the US, drove a lot of continuity and resilience certifications and conversations. And I think the same thing is happening or will happen again. But as it pertains to resilience, there isn't a standard for resilience. There isn't a real solid set of metrics. So it will be a combination of factors. The 223XX series, including the one on crisis management that my colleague James Green was talking about a couple of weeks ago, 22320, which is about emergency management and crisis communications. I think that will definitely be an area of driving interest in the market.
Thank you very much for answering that. And I'm just going to tag something on the end of that Philip Martin sent in actually, because it's around the regulation side. It might be Alan, it might be Sean, it might be Chris, Stelios. He might want to chirp, I was going to say chirp, chirp in the nicest sense. But regulators would give no leeway at this time. On the contrary, they will ensure that they are not found wanting in their supervision. Learning lessons from 2008. So it might be one for Alan, it might be one for Sean, but in terms of, supervision at this minute in time is obviously going to be a challenge for companies, but, the regulators are going to be wanting it more, right? Alan, would you like to answer that?
Just one comment on that. As far as I know, nobody in the regulatory community has relaxed compliance requirements. Nobody has said, oh, your cybersecurity regulatory requirements, yeah, we're just going to waive those for the next 9 months. So I think it's a valid point. And if anything, I think the legal profession is going to skyrocket towards the end of the pandemic as lawsuits start to fly about what happened with data privacy and discrimination during the pandemic. Yeah.
That was the old privacy then. But
yeah.
Alan,
yeah, in terms of the regulator oversight, regulatory burden, certainly what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing from colleagues in other organisations is that is dramatically increasing. The nature of the interaction has changed. Obviously, there's a lot more use of Zoom, calls, etc. But what has also increased is the request for information over a very short period. How you're responding to this, how you're responding to that, and setting out a set of scenarios. And certainly I do not see that stopping anytime soon, and it's going to cover all aspects, right through from financial stability through to protecting customer outcomes through to data privacy, etc. So yeah, definitely increasing.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to come in on there, or would you like me to flip it to another question? You all got on that? Well, this one might, again, it tags on to what we said before. It's about the working from home on the screen, but it's, there's a personal security risk, if potentially your children or your possessions are in the background. You had Dele Alli obviously get broken into, a footballer in the UK, at gunpoint, had his watches stolen. Not saying he was zooming before it, but he may have been, right? Like Chris has got a white wall, and this is Andrew McIntyre again's comment. But you can see Terry's front room, you can see my loft, and you can see a little bit of Sean's, and a tiny bit of Stelios. He shut the door before. You've got his music room behind that door, and I will have him playing the drums live on an episode in the future. But in terms of that respect, there's a bit of a personal security risk there. Is there anything, Chris, you might want to come on that one?
I was just going to say it is interesting because you've got to bear in mind that it's been quite difficult for criminals at the last 3 months, particularly physical security, if you like, because people have been at home. But actually, this will encourage people to do different things and look at different crimes and things like actually taking people hostage. I mean, I know it sounds quite extreme, but actually, if they know you're in your home address, they know what you do. These options are there, and it's silly to think that criminals won't make use of them. The thing with Dele Alli, the footballer, I mean, you'll remember that a couple of years ago, some Liverpool footballers were all burgled when they were being filmed playing in another country, in Turkey, I think. So criminals will use these times to commit crime, and it's we've all got to consider that.
That's great, thank you. Sean, have you got anything on that? Don't worry, you don't have to come in.
Nothing that we haven't covered already, I don't think. No, I think Chris got it down pretty pat.
Perfect. Okay, I'm just seeing if there's quite a few here actually, and I'm just trying to see who is next on the list. What have we got here? Thomas Kroll, who joined us on episode 1 actually as a special guest on the panel, like Terry and Ellen. He's saying he had a discussion today about work from home enabling companies to recruit from anywhere, not just the local labour force. So that obviously opens up opportunity, but also negative points as well. So the discussion led on to companies being able to potentially pay less. You've got that Fiverr website where you can pay £5 and get websites built and all that kind of stuff. But he said you're going to pay less for people living in rural areas and other countries. This sounds good for companies, but does it introduce more, inequality within the workplace and create more risks and more issues? So who would like to come in?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was hired by SAI Global, the company was based out of Australia, and the closest office to me was in Boston. I would have never gotten that job had they not hired remote workers. And I think that, typically the argument for remote work is that it attracts the best talent. Now, what happened now in this pandemic has obviously escalated the adoption of remote work drastically to the point where now Twitter is saying that all employees could work from home in perpetuity, and Google, Facebook, Salesforce, some of the biggest companies in the world are saying you can work from home for the rest of the year. Google today announced if you work from home, you can have a $1,000 budget to buy furniture. I mean, maybe I'm naive, or maybe I'm just an optimist. I would like to think that work from home will result in companies seeking out and attracting and hiring better talent that fit the roles of the jobs that they're trying to hire, and that they will not outsource that talent or resort to cheaper labor internationally that will deprive the jobs of people that would normally be competing for that role. I think if they do opt to do that, if they do, what the question is assuming, look for cheaper labor to hire and outsource and replace these jobs with more easy to, more affordable remote options, it says a lot about their values and culture. And I think it will ultimately reflect poorly on them from the perspective of customers and shareholders.
Great point. And I think Stelios, you raised the finger on that one. We've got.
But also, Chris raised his hand before me, so I'm happy to let him first say what he wants.
Thanks, Stelios. Just a very quick one. I'll refer you back to my insider threat issue. And human resources are a key to making sure you've got you've got a secure workforce. And I do fear that outsourcing basically loses a great deal of that. And you are opening yourself up if you don't do the checks, the pre-employment checks, the security culture piece, and also people when they leave the organization having their access taken away.
There's a whole new world of third-party risk that comes into play if you do that.
So if I may also add a couple of cents. I think that definitely there is value in what I call the nomadic workforce. Basically, being able to have be able to hire people, talents that really suit your needs from anywhere they can become available in the world. Of course, this means that there is definitely a loss of, let's say, connection between the people and the business process. So eventually, if you just hire people who just spend their time working for a company, but they don't mix with the people and you don't understand the culture of the company, you are definitely facing risks as regards to your business processes, especially if they are not designed to be run remotely. So there is value there. I definitely see there is a future in this concept of the nomadic workforce, but this definitely requires a re-engineering of the business processes so that they can be run in a secure way. And if I could also crash a little bit of your point, because you said that you had this opportunity in Boston, etc. I also had this opportunity in Germany. I was in Greece, and then I decided to move to Germany. I didn't do it from Greece.
I prefer Greece over Germany personally.
Right,
yes,
we're actually bang on time. I've just sent a chat message out saying hopefully everyone can just hold on for 5 minutes. I think we've just got another question or two, and then we can wrap up. But there was a good point made here about, and it tends to, the conversation we had as a pre-speaker call a few weeks ago was around the online training. So obviously Sean with the ethics and compliance training, but as a group, just in terms of, training your employees or onboarding, most people are get rid of people, but onboarding and training or training at home, compliance, being an ex-PwC guy, I used to do online compliance reports all the time and making sure I didn't have any shares in the companies that we were we were auditing, and they didn't pay me enough for me to have any shares, to be honest, but so it was a pointless exercise. But is there anything you guys can mention that about the training modules, completing that and then keeping tags on your employees, following your key controls? Alan? Then sure. Oh, Alan, 1 second, mate. 1 second. That's completely my fault. You're back.
Hi, yeah, I think it's even more vital, and certainly from a financial services perspective, it's something that's been, is quite embedded in organisations. And I think it's not only the fact that people have to complete these online modules, but it's the training and follow-up where people do not complete it, and that there's actually some consequences for not completing it, rather than just, oh, it's unfortunate. I think there has got to be in performance, reward, somehow. And I think the other thing in the current environment, in addition to that, the mandatory stuff that you do online, supplement it by still delivering the training sessions, but use Zoom. And as you do them, do what you've done in this thing week, make sure there's opportunity for people to interact, make sure that they're commenting in the chat, etc., so that you can actually check that they're engaged in the training, they're actually taking some level of understanding, rather than they've just dialed in to claim an attendance point.
No, that's a great point. I've been guilty in the past of listening in to long calls by companies where you just put the sound on and you've got your feet up.
Yeah.
And you're doing something else, right? So Sean, I think you had something to add as well.
Yeah, I think there's two factors here, right? So a lot of organizations, manufacturing, companies that have factories that are typically doing face-to-face training, there's obviously a challenge for them to adopt that face-to-face training to a virtual environment, where even if you're doing it on a virtual meeting like this, hopefully the more secure program like GoToWebinar or something with better data privacy settings in Zoom, it's still not the same as if you're delivering it face-to-face. So you really need to think about how you adapt that typical face-to-face training for a virtual environment, because it's not just copy and paste, do the same thing. Now, in terms of online training, compliance and HR are typically laggards in terms of adopting technology trends. but it's safe to say that the majority of technology being used by compliance programs today have the tracking capability, the reporting capability to demonstrate what people started, what people finished, if they didn't finish, and remind them and report them, and have some pretty robust analytics there. The other best practice that I would say that companies should think about in this remote setting is to really enable mobile training. If you don't already have kind of mobile training as a default in terms of your program, enable someone to use their phone or their iPad to take that training as opposed to just doing it on their computer.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I think Stelios has got something to add on that one, and then I've got some questions, two related.
Quick one, like 10, only 10 seconds. So I remember some years ago, I was working for a multinational company, nothing to do with my current employer. I have to put that disclaimer. And I remember that there was an IT administrator who was actually passing the right answers to the people so that they can quickly pass the test of the online training. And that is why today, what we do is that we proactively, for example, attack our own employees. We try to phish them so that they remain on alert regarding the actual phishing attack that they might get from the bad guy. So yes, they may share the SOS answers between them, but in the end of the day, we will attack them and they will fall. So then they will learn.
No, that's a great point. And just to say that I was watching, I'm a Catherine Bigelow fan. My favorite movie is Point Break. Just going to get that out there quickly. But I was watching K-19 Widowmaker last night, actually. And obviously that was about the nuclear submarine that started leaking and all that kind of stuff and the risks around that. But they were doing drills all the way through their first voyage. So, that is what, I like the idea of phishing, and I don't think companies do it enough. And when they do, I don't think they run it well. I know, Chris, you do a lot of physical penetration testing, which sounds quite dodgy, but it isn't. And
I've never failed to get in, Lee. That's the annoying thing.
Yeah, but what is it, tailgating?
It might look quite obvious,
Yeah, because you mentioned about the tailgating, which obviously the next two questions, the reason why I mention it is to do with people getting rid of physical offices and how that'll impact. Though obviously tailgating will be less of an issue then, but you still have your data center issues, where the cloud is, whatever. So that's one question. I'm going to tag this one to it. So the other one is more to do with, I think Harpreet's mentioned the MOD are giving screens to all their staff. And then Gareth Evans has mentioned that Google are offering $3,000 per employee to buy the equipment. And Harpreet's saying a lot of people struggle to store it. Some people haven't got the room for that kind of equipment. And, there's also back to the equality divide in terms of, whether you can afford it if you have to buy it yourself. There's two things there. One is removal of workplaces, and the other one is, the inequality or giving them stuff that they can't house. So who would like to come in on those two?
I'll just mention something on I think I did mention it earlier, but actually I think there'll be more of a movement to companies and individuals using joined workspaces. So there's a number of companies now, I know it's certainly across London, I'm sure across the world, where you just go in and you get an individual space. Well, that is completely insecure from a perspective that you can overhear exactly what's being said at all times. So if you want to, you could, as an example, from a criminal's perspective, you find someone that's working for a particular company and you just hire the workspace next to them and you can hear exactly what's going on. So these things are what criminals think of, and we've got to be aware of that. And
then just to quickly go there, obviously WeWork and the equivalents are obviously all sweating at this minute in time because they'll be the first ones to go, in terms of contracts and that kind of thing. So has anyone got anything to mention, to add on to that, or anything to mention about the home working with the equipment or anything?
Well, I think the homework perspective, we're still in like the first inning of that happening. And it's interesting whether or not, if companies adopt that approach long term, if they find it to be the right step moving forward, will they reallocate some of their budget, some of their fiscal resources to give employees an allowance to buy the stuff that they might need to have a better work from home environment? We saw Google did it. Obviously, Google has unlimited resources, so they could swing that. It'll be interesting to see if other organizations kind of, here's $50, here's $100 a month, whatever, to do that.
Yeah,
cheaper than the real.
Yeah, I think the final point on it is it's back to the question that came up during, I think it was Stelios' presentation about the DSE assessments, etc. Companies will put controls in place, they'll give you $3,000 or whatever. You'll need to submit a receipt to prove that you actually bought, furniture, etc. for it, you bought a screen, etc. But what that's not going to pick up is, did you buy the right desk, the right seat, the right screen for you and for your home? And that's the type of things that are actually assessed when you're using them in the workplace. So I think there's going to be a huge rush for people saying, yeah, here, have some budget, you can spend up to X without authorization. And it'll be interesting to see when the first claim for the bad back is cropped up before it comes in. It might reverse that quite quickly.
No, absolutely. And we have hit 7:40, and I said we'd hit 7:30 and summarise. But I'm going to give one final question here. It's something that David Pelle mentioned at 7 o'clock, so he's due an answer hopefully. But we were talking about the sales teams being under pressure to meet targets and therefore succumbing to ABC issues. However, isn't the main risk from senior board managers who are even more under pressure to meet targets and maintain that business survival? I know we spoke about the survival element, Sean, the other week, and Chris and Stelios. How do you deal with senior ABC risks? The final question, and then I'll let everyone go back to the finish line. Stelios.
Okay. Good question. So I think that you have to be honest, and you have to explain specifically what is the risk, okay, and explain it in lay terms, because people, let's say people upstairs, they have other areas of expertise, and they are not supposed to fully understand, for example, how an IT risk is going to materialize and what will be the impact. So we, as CISOs or people who are responsible for the IT infrastructure, we must clearly state the risks. And I mentioned earlier when I was presenting that what we were forced to do with COVID was actually to introduce 2 new technologies at the same time. And that's not the normal way. Okay, so risks should be explained. So yes, you ask us, for example, to deploy right here, right now, let's say Microsoft 365, but nobody's going to properly use it. So there will be people who will lose information and there will be cost for it. You have to be prepared. I told you, now you know. I think that's the only approach, to be honest.
Alan, what we'll do is we'll try and get all 3 of you, if you all want to speak, and then I'll summarise. Yeah. Alan.
Okay. Yep. In 30 seconds, I think I agree with what Stelios has said, but there's 2 other things. One is oversight. Make your senior guys subject to the same level of oversight that you would do on the normal staff. And the other thing as well is this is where you really need the role of your non-executives in your board, who actually have a legal responsibility to monitor what senior guys, chief executive, etc. are doing. You really need them to perform the role.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then Chris or Sean on that one, and then anything to add?
I'll go first. So from my perspective, it's remembering the basics. Physical security, information security, and people security all have to be done properly. And if you don't do any one of those, then you've messed up. And it's reminding the board really that ideally you'd have one person in charge of all those areas, but that often is not the case. But it all comes down to cost. And return of investment on security is always a difficult one to show.
Thank you, Chris. And Sean, anything to add as a summary on anything?
I think pressure is a waterfall. If the C-suite or the board is putting pressure on the C-suite is going to put pressure on the directors. It's just going to scale down to the bottom of the organization, and you need to be aware of that. You're creating that pressure, whether inadvertently or inadvertently, and you need to really, think about the short-term benefits of hitting that quarterly number versus the long-term benefits of doing business conduct, right? It's really the heart of everything we talk about.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And, in terms of the COVID scale, the Boris barometer, we are probably down here somewhere. But I'd like to thank everyone for staying with us who's on the line, and everyone, had to drop due to me eating, well, ourselves eating into their family meal time. Hopefully you enjoyed your microwave meals and your drinks. I'd like to thank Alan for joining on the panel, and Terry, you had to drop. Obviously, I'd like to thank the esteemed speakers, Stelios, Chris, and Sean. What we're going to do after this is put together Q&A responses from all the questions that came in. I'm still finalising the one from episode 1, but we'll get that out with the illustration, and then hopefully with some copy that we'll send out with it. And then the video, which I'll agree with anyone that asks questions and the speakers that they're okay with putting that out there to, to review on a later date. And then any feedback, please send it over to me. I'm looking to keep this going in between the live events as a bridge, and then keep the global community with Sean and Terry from the States. And I know a few people joining us from the Middle East, which is late over there, so thank you very much. So please, everyone stay safe, and thank you to all the speakers and all of the attendees.